The dusty wooden sign read, "Retired Police Dogs for Sale." The annual K9 retirement auction, a place where old service dogs were quietly sold off to strangers. Most people have seen police dogs in action, but very few have seen what happens after their years of service end. People gathered in the auction yard, their eyes locked on the row of metal cages lined up in front of the old wooden auction house. Inside them sat trembling German shepherds. Buyers circled like vultures. Some wanted guard dogs. Others wanted them for breeding. But no one wanted these broken, retired police dogs. To the crowd, they were just broken dogs. But once, they were police dogs. And now they were being sold to strangers like old equipment. Their fur was grayed, their eyes tired, yet loyal, and every single one of them believed their handler would return for them. But no one did. One German shepherd slowly lifted his head, tears streaking down his muzzle as if he understood exactly what was, happening. Everything changed the moment Officer Cole Bennett entered the auction. When he saw the trembling retired dogs, he froze. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened. His heart broke as he watched them cry quietly, still wearing their faded police K9 tags. Then the auctioneer shouted, "Who wants to start the bidding for these dogs?" Before anyone could place a bid, Officer Cole stepped forward. "Stop the auction," he shouted. "I will take all of them." The crowd went silent. No one could have predicted what happened next. Stay with us, because this story will leave you shocked. Before we start, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The sun hung low over the dusty sheriff's yard, casting long shadows across the worn wooden buildings as people gathered for the annual K9 retirement auction. It was supposed to be a simple event, routine, predictable, forgettable. But the moment the gates opened, a silent heaviness settled over the place, something that made the air feel colder despite the warm afternoon light. Rows of metal cages lined both sides of the yard, each one housing a German shepherd with tired eyes and graying fur. Dogs who had once sprinted through danger without hesitation now sat behind bars, shoulders slumped, their breath slow and defeated. A few pressed their noses against the metal, as if still expecting their handlers to return for them. But no familiar footsteps came. People murmured as they walked past the cages, whispering judgments as though they were examining old equipment instead of living heroes. "This one looks strong. This one is too old. This one probably has issues." Their words cut through the quiet like dull knives. Inside one of the cages, a dog lifted his head. His eyes, deep brown and filled with a kind of sorrow that words could never express, followed every passer-by with desperate hope. Another dog beside him let out a soft, heartbroken whine, nudging the bars with his paw, tears slipping down his fur. Yes, real tears. Tears that glistened in the sunlight and left the crowd uneasy. A man in a faded vest leaned toward the auctioneer. "Never seen dogs cry like that," he muttered. The auctioneer barely glanced at him. "They'll be fine once they're bought. People get too sentimental about these animals." But even he didn't sound convinced. Across the yard, an old wooden sign creaked in the wind. "Auction today." Beneath it, officers from surrounding towns stood with arms crossed, their faces unreadable. Some looked uncomfortable. Others avoided eye contact entirely. No one wanted to acknowledge the truth. These dogs weren't just retired. They were discarded. The auctioneer stepped onto the platform and tapped his clipboard loudly. "All right, folks, we'll start the bidding in just a few minutes. Please look over the dogs and decide which ones you're interested in. Once they're sold, they're your responsibility." A hush settled over the yard. A painful hush. One of the dogs barked suddenly, sharp, desperate. The sound startled several people, but the dog didn't care. He pushed his face between the bars, scanning the crowd for someone, anyone, that he recognized. When he found no one, he let out a low, trembling cry that made even the auctioneer hesitate. Another cage rattled as a German shepherd shifted, his chain collar clinking against the metal. His eyes were red, wet, almost human in their sorrow. The scene didn't feel like a retirement ceremony. It felt like a betrayal. And, though no one said it aloud, everyone sensed it. Something was terribly wrong with this auction. Officer Cole Bennett stepped out of his patrol vehicle, boots crunching over the gravel as he crossed the sheriff's yard. The sound of barking, whining, and metal rattling filled the air, but it wasn't noise to him. It was language. A language he understood better than most humans understood each other. Cole paused at the entrance, eyes narrowing as he took in the rows of cages. His heartbeat thudded heavier with each step he took. He had seen these auctions before, but never had they felt like this. Something felt off. Painfully off. The air carried a tension he couldn't explain, a quiet dread that seemed to cling to every cage, every dog, every breath. He scanned the yard, noticing the way the officers stood stiffly with their arms crossed, refusing to meet his gaze. That alone was a red flag. Officers usually greeted him, asked about his K-9 work, exchanged stories, joked about department drama. But today they looked through him, past him, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Cole walked toward the center of the yard, where the auctioneer was reading through his clipboard with the casualness of a man checking grocery lists. "Cole Bennett," the auctioneer greeted flatly without looking up. "Didn't expect to see you here." Cole's jaw tightened. "I heard some of the retired units from my district were being auctioned today." The auctioneer finally lifted his eyes, but his expression remained bland, almost forced. "Budget cuts, policy updates, you know the drill." Cole didn't respond. His attention had already shifted to the dogs, their posture, their expressions, their breathing. Years of K-9 work had given him a sixth sense for reading distress, and what he saw here wasn't normal anxiety. It was heartbreak. One dog in the nearest cage stared at him with wide, trembling eyes. Cole recognized him instantly. "Shadow," he whispered. The German shepherd pressed his face to the bars, choking on a soft cry that shattered Cole's composure. Shadow had worked with Cole's old partner before the incident. He was supposed to be living peacefully with a foster family now, not locked in a cage. Awaiting sale like equipment no one wanted. Cole knelt in front of him, gripping the bars. "Hey, buddy, what are you doing here?" he murmured, throat tightening. Shadow whimpered and lowered his head, pushing his paw through the gap. Cole held it gently, anger boiling in his chest. Behind him, a pair of officers exchanged uneasy glances. "Why is he here?" Cole demanded, standing abruptly. "Bennett," one officer said cautiously. "Decisions like these, they came from higher-ups." Cole's stomach dropped. "Higher-ups?" He scanned the lineup of cages again, noticing several familiar faces. Dogs he had trained with, deployed with, bled with. Dogs who had saved officers' lives more than once. These were not dogs ready for retirement. These were dogs someone wanted gone. The realization hit him like a punch. Something wasn't just wrong. Something was being covered up. Cole took a slow breath, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and heartbreak as he whispered to himself, "This isn't a retirement auction. This is a betrayal." As Cole moved deeper into the yard, the atmosphere shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The barking softened. The whining grew louder. Dogs who had been sitting motionless moments earlier began standing, tails low, ears perked, their attention locked onto him as though a familiar scent had awakened something long buried. Cole felt dozens of eyes tracking him. Not aggressive, not fearful. Something else. Something painfully human. He approached the next row of cages, and the reaction was immediate. A German shepherd named Titan, once known for his unstoppable courage on drug raids, rose trembling to his feet. Titan pressed his forehead against the bars, releasing a low, broken whine that made the crowd fall silent. The tough ranchers and bidders who had come casually to buy a dog suddenly shifted uncomfortably, unsure what they were witnessing. Titan wasn't acting like a dog greeting an officer. He was acting like a child seeing a parent after being abandoned. "Easy, boy," Cole whispered, stepping closer. Titan let out a soft cry and pawed at the bars, his claws scraping desperately. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes, catching the sunlight. The sight hit Cole like a hammer to the chest. Titan had never shown fear, not once in all the years Cole knew him. Seeing him like this felt wrong on every level. Then, as if drawn by some invisible pull, other dogs followed his lead. Ranger, the explosives detection dog whose loyalty was legendary, pressed his muzzle between the bars, whining deep in his throat. Blitz, who used to run into burning warehouses without hesitation, started pacing in small panicked circles inside his cage, looking at Cole with pleading eyes. One by one, every dog in that row began reacting. People stopped whispering. The auctioneer lowered his clipboard. Even the officers who had been avoiding eye contact looked stunned. It was as if the dogs had recognized not just Cole, but the truth behind why they were there. Cole swallowed hard, moving slowly from cage to cage. Each dog nudged him, reached for him, cried for him. Some pressed their bodies against the bars so hard the metal rattled. Others rested their heads low, ears flattened as though apologizing for something they didn't understand. Shadow, still holding Cole's gaze from across the yard, let out a howl, a long, haunting sound that made every person freeze. It wasn't a howl of aggression, it was grief, a deep, aching grief that no animal should ever feel. Cole felt the weight of dozens of emotions crashing into him all at once: anger, heartbreak, confusion, guilt. He had known these dogs for years, trained with them, deployed with them, watched them save lives again and again. These weren't just K-9 units, they were family, and watching them reach for him like this, crying, shaking, begging, meant they had been suffering long before this auction began. He placed a hand on Titan's cage, voice cracking. "What did they do to you?" The dogs whimpered as if answering him, and Cole knew with chilling certainty, this wasn't just a retirement auction. This was a cry for help. The sudden wave of emotion sweeping through the yard had left everyone unsettled. The dogs' cries echoed against the old wooden buildings, their trembling bodies pressed against metal bars as they watched Cole move among them. Something about their desperation shook even the toughest men in the crowd, but the auctioneer, determined to keep things business as usual, cleared his throat loudly, snapping the tension like a brittle twig. "All right, folks," he announced, stepping onto the platform. "Before we begin, I need to lay out the rules. Listen carefully." Cole turned toward him, jaw tightening. He already knew he wouldn't like what he was about to hear. The auctioneer raised a clipboard and read in a clipped, emotionless tone. Rule number 1. All sales are final. Once a dog is purchased, ownership is transferred immediately and the county holds no liability. The crowd murmured. A few people nodded. But Cole felt his stomach twist. These weren't pieces of furniture. They were living partners who had risked their lives for years. Rule number 2, the auctioneer continued. Dogs will not be reassigned to former handlers or departments. No exceptions. Cole froze. That rule didn't exist in any official retirement policy he'd ever seen. Titan whimpered behind him, sensing the spike of anger that rose inside Cole like wildfire. Shadow barked once, loud, sharp, directed at the platform as if he understood the cruelty behind the words. The auctioneer pressed on. Rule number 3. Medical records will not be disclosed. Buyers assume all financial responsibility for care. A ripple of discomfort swept through the crowd. No medical records, no history, no transparency. That was dangerous, irresponsible, and deeply suspicious. Cole stepped forward. "Where did these rules come from?" he demanded. The auctioneer avoided his eyes. "County directive." "Which county official signed off on this?" "Bennett," the auctioneer snapped. "It's not up for debate." Cole clenched his fists. The dogs reacted instantly, barking louder, pacing frantically, rattling their cages in agitation. People began backing away from the front row, unsettled by how intensely the animals responded to the tension. "Moving on," the auctioneer said, raising his voice over the noise. "Rule number 4. If a dog is not purchased by the end of the day, it will be transferred to other facilities for processing." Cole's blood ran cold. The crowd fell silent. Nobody needed clarification. Processing didn't mean training. It meant disposal. Shadow let out a sound that was not a bark, not a howl. It was heartbreak. Cole stepped onto the platform, eyes blazing. "You can't do this. These dogs served this county. They saved officers' lives." The auctioneer finally looked at him, and for a split second, guilt flickered in his eyes, but it vanished quickly. "Rules are rules, Officer Bennett. Now step back." Cole didn't move, because one thing had become painfully clear. This wasn't an auction. It was an execution disguised as paperwork. Cole didn't step back. He stood firm on the wooden platform, his boots planted as if rooted to the earth itself. The auctioneer stiffened, clearly not expecting resistance. The crowd sensed the shift immediately. Something dangerous and electric hung in the air. "Officer Bennett," the auctioneer warned, his voice tightening, "you're disrupting a lawful county process." Cole's eyes burned with a fury he could no longer suppress. "Lawful?" he repeated, his voice low and shaking with emotion. "What's lawful about hiding medical records? What's lawful about forbidding reassignment to handlers? What's lawful about threatening to process dogs who served this county for years?" The crowd turned silent. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. The dogs, every single one, went still. The auctioneer tried to maintain control. He lifted his clipboard like a shield. "If you cannot behave professionally, I will ask you to leave." "No," Cole snapped. "You're going to answer me." Shadow barked sharply from his cage, the sound echoing across the yard like a call to arms. Titan rose on his hind legs, paws against the bars, whining anxiously. Other dogs followed, their distress rising in waves. People stepped back from the cages, uneasy as the animals reacted not with aggression, but with raw desperation, as though pleading for Cole to keep fighting. A deputy approached cautiously. "Cole," he said quietly, "this isn't the place. Let it go." Cole spun toward him. "You want me to let it go? These dogs ran into gunfire for us. They tracked missing children in storms. They saved officers who wouldn't be alive today without them. And now you want to sell them to random bidders like they're old equipment?" The deputy looked down, unable to respond. The auctioneer slammed the clipboard on the podium. "The dogs are county property, Bennett. You of all people should understand protocol." Cole's voice rose. "Protocol doesn't involve betrayal." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A heavy silence followed, thick, tense, and suffocating. The auctioneer leaned forward, lowering his voice into a cold, authoritative growl. "This is bigger than you, bigger than your emotions. The decision is made. Step down." Cole took a step closer instead. "No, not until you tell me who ordered these rules. That information is classified." "Classified?" Cole's laugh came out hollow and bitter. "Since when does a retirement auction involve classified orders?" The auctioneer's jaw twitched. He didn't answer, and that alone was an answer. Cole lowered his voice, but the quiet intensity made every word land like a hammer. "Who are you protecting? And why are you hiding what happened to these dogs before they were brought here?" The auctioneer swallowed hard, his facade cracking for a split second. Before he could recover, Shadow let out a long, anguished howl. The other dogs joined him, the yard erupting in a chorus of heartbreak. Even hardened officers felt their throats tighten. Cole pointed toward the cages. "Look at them," he said. "Does that look like retirement to you? Does that look like dogs ready to be processed? These animals are terrified of something, and they're begging us to see it." The auctioneer hesitated. For the first time since the auction began, he didn't seem so sure of himself, but instead of backing down, he lifted the clipboard again and snapped, "Bidding begins now." The gavel struck, and the explosion of tension that followed would change everything. The auctioneer's gavel struck the podium again, echoing sharply through the tense yard. But in Cole's mind, the sound didn't pull him back into the moment. Instead, it triggered something else. Memories he had spent years trying to bury, but never could. Titan's trembling eyes. Shadow's grief-filled howl. The desperation of every dog in the yard. He had seen these emotions before, on the night everything changed. It was 3 years ago, long before any policy change or suspicious retirement order. Cole and his partner, Officer Jake Larson, had been dispatched to an abandoned warehouse after reports of armed traffickers hiding inside. The night was suffocatingly still, the kind of silence that made every breath feel too loud. Cole remembered kneeling beside Titan and Ranger, checking their harnesses. Jake stood beside Shadow, affectionately patting his head. "You ready, boy?" Jake whispered. Shadow's tail thumped once. He was always ready. The team moved in quietly, shadows slipping through shadows. Titan led the advance nose low, ears high, alert to every molecule in the air. Ranger flanked left, scanning for explosives. Shadow stayed ahead of Jake, his instincts razor sharp. They were more than trained units. They were brothers, partners, heroes. Halfway through the warehouse, a sudden clatter echoed from a back room. Cole signaled the team to stop. Titan froze. Ranger's ears shot forward. Shadow stiffened, growling low. Then it happened. Gunfire erupted from behind the walls like a storm. One bullet struck Jake before anyone could react. Cole still remembered the sound, the sickening thud, the sharp inhalation, the way Jake's body collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. "Jake!" Cole shouted, diving to him. But before he reached him, Shadow was already there. The German shepherd threw himself on top of Jake, shielding him with his own body. Teeth bared, snarling with a fury Cole had never seen. Titan and Ranger lunged forward too, pushing back the attackers long enough for backup to arrive. Cole had Jake's blood on his hands when the paramedics came. He remembered Jake's trembling voice. "Take care of them," he whispered. He wasn't talking about colleagues, he was talking about the dogs. Shadow nuzzled Jake's cheek, whining softly as the life faded from his partner's eyes. Cole had never heard a sound like that whine. Not before, not since. Jake died on the way to the hospital, and everything changed after that night. Cole blinked back into the present, heart aching. The dogs weren't just units he knew. They were the last remnants of Jake's legacy, heroes who had saved Cole's life, Jake's life, and countless others. Shadow, Titan, Ranger, Blitz. Each one had carried scars from that night. Physical scars, emotional scars, scars that Cole had helped them heal through months of rehabilitation and training. And now, here they were, locked in cages, sold like property, treated like they never mattered. Cole felt anger swirl inside him, thick and suffocating. How could the county erase everything these dogs had done? How could they bury the truth of their service, their sacrifice? "He trusted me," Cole whispered under his breath. "Jake trusted me to protect them." Shadow pressed his paw against the bars as though hearing the promise. Cole's jaw tightened. He wouldn't fail them. Not again. And whatever darkness was lurking behind this auction, he was going to drag it into the light. The flashback faded, replaced by the present-day chaos of the auction yard. Dogs barked and whimpered, cages rattled, and the auctioneer's forced confidence cracked with every passing second. But Cole wasn't listening to any of it. His focus was razor-sharp now. The truth was out there. Someone was hiding something. and Cole was done being silent. He stepped off the platform and walked straight toward Deputy Harris, one of the few officers Cole once trusted. Harris stood stiffly near the fence, eyes shifting nervously as Cole approached. "Harris," Cole said quietly, "tell me what's going on." Harris swallowed hard. "Bennett, don't do this." "Don't do what? Ask why these dogs were forced into early retirement? Ask why their medical records are being hidden. Ask why Jake's K9, Shadow, is in a cage instead of with the family he was promised?" Harris rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding the question. "Just let it go, Cole. Orders came from above." "Above who?" Cole pressed. "The sheriff? The county board? Someone higher?" Harris looked around, voice dropping lower. "You didn't hear this from me, but these dogs didn't fail their evaluations. They passed." Cole froze. "Passed? All of them?" Harris nodded once. "That means they weren't supposed to retire." A heavy silence settled between them. Cole felt the weight of every word. Harris hesitated, then leaned closer. "Look, a new private security contractor approached the county. They want fresh K9 units, only young, uninjured ones." Cole's jaw tightened. "So, the county forced the older, loyal dogs into retirement just to make room for new dogs?" "It's not just that." Harris's voice shook slightly. "The county gets a commission for each new dog purchased. Big money. They needed these dogs. Out of the way." Cole stared at him in disbelief. "You're telling me they pushed out dogs who served for years, who saved lives, because someone wanted a paycheck?" Harris nodded reluctantly. "And the dogs that don't get sold today." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Cole already knew. Cole gripped the fence so hard his knuckles turned white. "Jake would be sick if he saw this." Harris's voice cracked. "We all are, Cole, but we were told to keep our mouths shut." "Why no medical records?" Cole asked. Harris sighed. "Because they show the truth. They show these dogs didn't fail. They were forced to retire early. Some were even injured during training for the new contractor's demonstration tests. The county didn't want anyone knowing these dogs were pushed too hard." Cole felt something inside him break. Not anger, not shock. Betrayal. Deep, suffocating betrayal. Behind him, Titan began pawing at the cage, sensing Cole's rising fury. Shadow pushed his muzzle through the bars, whining softly, his eyes pleading. Cole turned back to Harris. "Who signed the retirement orders?" Harris hesitated. Then, "The sheriff." Cole's breath caught in his throat. "The sheriff? He would never." "He didn't want to," Harris said quickly, "but the county board threatened to cut department funding. Either he approved the retirements or half the department would lose their jobs." Cole staggered back a step. Every dog in the yard began barking louder, as if echoing the truth that had just been revealed. The auctioneer slammed his gavel again, trying to regain control. "Let's continue. Bidding begins." "Stop!" Cole shouted. The yard went dead silent. Cole marched back to the platform, eyes blazing. "Everyone deserves to know what's happening here. These dogs weren't retired because they're old or unfit. They were forced out, used, pushed, and discarded so someone could make money." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's face went pale. "Bennett, you're out of line." "No," Cole said. "I'm finally in line with the truth." Shadow howled behind him, long and anguished, as if begging Cole not to stop. And Cole knew he wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. Because something bigger than corruption was unfolding. A fight for justice, and the dogs were counting on him. The auction yard had gone silent. Not because the crowd understood everything, but because they felt it. The tension, the betrayal, the pain radiating from every cage, but nothing prepared them for what happened next. As Cole stood on the platform, calling out the truth, a sudden metallic clang rang across the yard. People flinched. Officers turned sharply. It came from Blitz's cage. Blitz. The fearless German shepherd who once charged through burning buildings, who pulled wounded officers to safety, who never showed fear even when surrounded by gunfire. Now he stood trembling. His legs shook violently as he pressed his forehead against the bars. His breathing came in short, panicked bursts, each louder than the last. His ears pinned back, tail tucked so tightly it nearly vanished beneath him. His entire body curled inward like he was bracing for a blow. Cole felt his heart rupture. No. Blitz, buddy, he whispered, stepping closer. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the mighty K9 collapsed onto his side with a soft, broken whine. Blitz's chest rose and fell rapidly, his eyes wide, glassy with terror. Tears pooled on the concrete beneath him. Actual tears. The auctioneer froze mid-sentence. Officers stopped moving. Even the bidders, many of whom had come for selfish reasons, stood still, their faces paling as they watched the dog fall apart. Blitz wasn't just afraid. He was breaking. Cole dropped to his knees beside the cage. Hey, look at me, he said softly, voice cracking. You're okay. I'm here. Blitz lifted his head weakly and forced himself to crawl closer, dragging his belly along the cage floor until his muzzle pressed through the bars. His whimpers grew softer, more painful, like the sound of a heart tearing itself open. Cole pressed his forehead against Blitz's. The cold steel bars were the only thing separating them. It's me, buddy, Cole whispered. You're not alone. Blitz let out a sound that didn't belong to any animal. It was too human, too emotional, too full of memories. A cry of someone who had been strong for too long, and finally couldn't hold it in anymore. Titan began barking frantically in his cage nearby, pacing back and forth, clearly distressed by Blitz's condition. Ranger whined loudly, scratching at the floor. Shadow pressed both paws through the bars, claws scraping the ground as if trying to reach his fallen friend. The entire row of dogs reacted, not in chaos, but in grief. It was as if Blitz's breakdown tore open wounds they all carried. He's having a stress collapse, Cole said, voice shaking as he looked at the officers. He hasn't reacted like this since Jake died. He remembers. He knows what's happening. The auctioneer stared at Blitz, stunned into silence. One of the bidders, an older woman, covered her mouth. My God, these dogs have been traumatized. Another man stepped forward. This isn't retirement. This is cruelty. The shift was immediate. The crowd wasn't just confused anymore. They were angry. Cole stood slowly, placing a final, gentle hand on Blitz. This ends now, he said, voice low but fierce. Blitz whimpered softly, trusting him. The moment had changed everything. Now, stopping the auction wasn't just Cole's mission. It was the will of every person and every dog in the yard. The yard was no longer an auction yard. It was a battlefield of emotions, fear, anger, heartbreak, all swirling together in a storm that no one could ignore anymore. Blitz lay trembling in his cage. Shadow pressed his paws through the bars, crying softly. Titan barked in helpless desperation. And Cole. Cole stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, eyes burning with the kind of fury that comes only from witnessing injustice against those who cannot defend themselves. The auctioneer slammed his gavel again, voice shaking. Enough. The auction will proceed. First dog up for bid? No. The single word cut through the air like lightning. Every head turned. Cole stepped forward, shoulders squared, jaw tight, the kind of stance that said he wasn't asking permission. I said, no. The auctioneer blinked. Officer Bennett, you have no authority. I have all the authority I need, Cole shot back, because I'm the only one here doing what's right. People murmured. Cameras from phones were already pointed at him. Officers shifted uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or stand down. Cole looked at the cages, at the dogs who once charged into gunfire for him, and something inside him snapped back into place. A promise, a duty, a loyalty deeper than rules or chains of command. These dogs served this county, Cole said, voice rising with emotion. They saved our lives. They saved children. They saved strangers. And this is how we repay them? Shadow whined softly, as if urging him on. Cole turned toward the auctioneer, eyes fierce. These dogs are heroes. They don't belong in cages. They don't deserve to be sold to the highest bidder. So hear me clearly. He took a breath that shook the entire yard. I will take all of them. Gasps erupted everywhere. All of them, Cole repeated, louder now. Every single one of these dogs leaves with me today. The auctioneer stared, stunned. That's impossible. You can't. I can, Cole said, and I will. People leaned in. Officers whispered among themselves. Even the dogs fell silent, as if holding their breath. The auctioneer sputtered. Bennett, do you understand the cost? The rules? The liability? I don't care about cost. I don't care about rules written to hide corruption. All I care about is saving the lives of the dogs who once saved ours. Shadow barked once, sharp, triumphant. And for the first time since the auction began, hope flickered in the eyes of every dog. Cole looked at the cages, voice trembling. You're coming home. All of you. For a long, suspended moment, the entire yard froze. Cole's declaration hung in the air like a thunderclap, echoing off the metal cages and wooden fences. People stared. Officers blinked in disbelief. Even the auctioneer stood stiff, his knuckles white around the handle of his gavel. Then the reaction began. No, 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 absolutely not, the auctioneer sputtered, slamming the gavel down again. That is not how this works. Officers, stop him. Two deputies stepped forward, hands out, trying to reason with him. Cole, one said, don't make this harder. You can't interfere with county property. But Cole didn't back down. If anything, he stepped closer to the cages, positioning himself between the dogs and the advancing officers. County property, he repeated, his voice trembling with anger. These dogs aren't property. They're heroes. Titan barked loudly behind him as if agreeing. Bennett, another deputy said, firmer this time. Stand down. Right now. The crowd whispered anxiously. Several people raised their phones to record. The tension thickened like fog rolling over the yard. Cole clenched his fists. I'm not standing down. I'm standing with them. The deputies exchanged a look, then took another step forward. And that's when everything changed. Shadow let out a sudden piercing bark. Not aggressive, not angry. A warning. Titan barked next, then Ranger. Within seconds, every dog in every cage rose to their feet. The yard filled with the synchronized sound of claws scraping metal, dogs stepping forward in unison, pressing their bodies against the bars. Their eyes locked on the officers moving toward Cole. The deputies froze mid-step. One whispered. What's happening? Then it escalated. Shadow shoved his shoulder against the cage door, hard. The latch rattled violently. Titan followed, throwing his weight into the bars. Ranger dug his claws under the bottom edge, trying to lift it. Cage after cage erupted with desperate movement. Not attacking, not panicking. Protecting. They were trying to break out, not to escape, but to form a barrier around Cole. Cole's breath caught in his throat. Easy, boys, he whispered, though his voice trembled with emotion. I'm right here. But the dogs didn't stop. Their bodies pushed, pressed, slammed. Some wedged their paws through the gaps as if reaching for him. Others howled, a haunting sound that filled the entire yard and sent chills down every spine. The deputies stepped back instinctively. Control your animals, the auctioneer yelled. They're not mine, Cole shot back. They're acting on instinct, protective instinct. Shadow barked again, a deep, commanding sound that rippled through the pack. Titan snarled, not at the officers, but at the injustice in the air. Blitz, still weak from his breakdown, pulled himself to his feet and pressed his head against the Bars letting out a low, determined growl. The crowd shifted. People started whispering. They're protecting him. They know he's on their side. They're choosing Cole. A little girl in the crowd tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, the dogs want to go with him." Her words hit harder than any argument. One of the deputies lowered his voice. "Sir, we need to call animal control. This is getting out of hand." "No," the other whispered back. "Look at them. They're terrified of us, but not of Bennett." The auctioneer tried one last time. "Officer Bennett, step away from the cages or you will be removed." Cole didn't move. Instead, he knelt down, right in front of Shadow's cage, and placed his hand on the metal. "I'm here," he said softly, "and I'm not letting anyone hurt you again." Shadow nudged his muzzle against the bars, and in that moment, everyone knew. This wasn't just defiance. This was loyalty. Unbreakable, undeniable loyalty. The dogs weren't dangerous. They were choosing their protector, and the officers who saw it no longer knew whose side they were supposed to be on. Before anyone could move, before the deputies could decide whether to intervene or retreat, the sharp growl of an engine rolled across the yard. A black SUV pulled up beside the sheriff's fence, its engine cut off with a low rumble that made every officer turn. The door opened. A tall woman in a dark suit stepped out, her badge glinting in the sunlight. Internal Affairs Division. Special Agent Mara Collins. The auctioneer's face drained of color. Why is Internal Affairs here? Mara's heels clicked against the gravel as she approached, her eyes scanning the cages, the trembling dogs, the distressed crowd, and, finally, Cole. "Officer Bennett," she said calmly, "I got your message." The auctioneer's jaw dropped. "Message? What message?" Cole stepped forward. "I called her. After Shadow turned up in that cage, I knew something wasn't right. I needed someone outside the county to see it." Shadow barked once, as if confirming the decision. Mara nodded, taking in the dog's condition. She crouched beside Blitz, who whimpered softly, his body still trembling from emotional collapse. She turned to the crowd. "Everyone, step back from the cages." No one argued. Mara stood, eyes sharp and unforgiving. "Auctioneer Thompson," she said coldly, "your operation ends now." The auctioneer sputtered. You can't just shut down an authorized county auction." "Oh, I absolutely can," Mara replied, pulling a folder from her case, "especially when there is evidence of forced retirements, falsified evaluations, withheld medical records, and financial kickbacks from a private security contractor." Gasps shot through the crowd like sparks. Cole crossed his arms. "So it's true." Mara opened the folder, revealing documents stamped with county seals. Officer Bennett wasn't the only one who suspected something. Multiple complaints were filed internally, but they were buried. The deputies exchanged uneasy looks. The auctioneer shook his head wildly. "This is a misunderstanding." Mara snapped her gaze to him. "Then explain why these dogs show signs of overwork, untreated injuries, and psychological trauma less than 5 months after their last on-duty evaluations marked them as fit for service." The crowd murmured angrily. Mara continued, voice hardening. "Explain why funding records show a sudden increase in budget allocation for new K-9 acquisitions, approved immediately after these forced retirements." The auctioneer swallowed. "And explain why several medical reports were altered, digitally edited, to mark these dogs as unfit for duty, despite evidence to the contrary." Cole clenched his fists. "So the county broke them on purpose, just to replace them." Titan began pacing, letting out a distressed bark. Mara nodded at Cole. "You were right to call me." The auctioneer lost what little composure he had left. "This is ridiculous. These dogs were old." "They are not old," Mara cut in sharply. "Each of these dogs is between 5 and 7 years old. Prime working age." Shadow growled. not at the officers but at the lies hanging in the air. Mara stepped closer to the auctioneer. The county planned to auction them quickly without transparency and send the unsold dogs to be euthanized under the label unadoptable due to behavioral issues. A wave of horrified gasps swept the yard. A woman in the crowd cried out they were going to kill them. Blitz whimpered, pressing his head against the bars. The auctioneer backed away. I was just following orders. Mara lifted her badge. And now, you will answer for them. She turned to Cole. Until this investigation is complete, no dog leaves this yard except through authorized humane transfer. Cole nodded. Good, because I meant what I said. Shadow barked softly, a hopeful sound. Mara raised an eyebrow. You really plan to take them all? Cole looked at the trembling heroes behind the cages. Yes, he said, every single one. And for the first time, the dogs believed they might actually be saved. The yard buzzed with stunned whispers as internal affairs agents moved in, securing documents, interviewing officers, and snapping photos of the cages. For the first time since the auction began, the atmosphere shifted from dread to cautious hope. Mara Collins walked to the center of the yard and raised her voice. By order of the Internal Affairs Division, she announced, these dogs are hereby released from the county auction system pending humane transfer. A cheer rippled through the crowd. Cole exhaled a breath he'd been holding for hours. Titan barked excitedly. Ranger paced with his tail wagging for the first time that day. Even Blitz lifted his head, ears perking at the sound of freedom. Deputies hurried to unlock the cages. One by one, the doors swung open with loud metallic clicks that echoed like liberation bells. Titan was the first to step out. He approached Cole, lowering his head against his leg in a gesture of gratitude. Ranger followed, leaning against Cole's side. Blitz limped out, still weak, and Cole gently supported him with an arm. The dogs surrounded him, forming a protective half-circle, almost as if claiming him as their leader. The crowd watched in awe. They're choosing him, someone whispered. He really is their person. But as the dogs gathered around Cole, one cage remained closed. Shadow's. A deputy fumbled with the latch. It's stuck, he muttered, jiggling it again. But it wasn't stuck. Shadow hadn't moved. He just sat there, still motionless, staring at Cole with an expression no one could decipher. Cole stepped forward. Shadow, he said softly. It's okay, buddy. You're free now. Shadow didn't move. His eyes glistened, emotions swirling behind them. Fear, longing, grief, memories too heavy for even a heroic dog to carry. The deputy finally pushed the door open. There, he said. You're good to go. But Shadow still didn't step out. Cole felt something tighten in his chest. He crouched down, reaching a hand inside. Shadow. What's wrong? Slowly, painfully, Shadow crawled forward until his muzzle touched Cole's hand. His body trembled with every breath, but he didn't fully step out of the cage. It hit Cole like a punch. Shadow wasn't refusing freedom. He was afraid of it. Cole whispered gently, Are you afraid you're losing someone again? Shadow's ears twitched. His chest rose and fell sharply. Memories of Jake, his handler, his world, lingered in every corner of this dog's heart. Leaving the cage felt like leaving the past behind forever. Cole stepped into the cage himself. Shadow leaned into him instantly, burying his face against Cole's vest with a soft, broken sound. A sound everyone recognized. Grief finally releasing. Cole wrapped his arms around him. You're not losing anyone, he murmured. You're coming with me. I promised Jake I'd take care of you, and I will. Only then did Shadow finally stand, pressing against Cole as they stepped out together. The crowd erupted in relieved applause. And as Shadow joined the other dogs, one truth was undeniable. For the first time since losing Jake, Shadow had hope again. As Shadow stepped out of the cage beside Cole, the yard fell into a hush. It wasn't the silence of fear or tension this time. It was reverence. Shadow pressed himself against Cole's leg, tail low but slowly wagging, as though rediscovering a piece of safety he thought he'd lost forever. The other dogs gathered around too, forming an instinctive circle of unity, their tired bodies leaning into one another. Mara Collins watched, arms crossed but eyes softened. "In all my years," she murmured, "I've never seen a group of K9s act like this." "Because they're a family," Cole replied, rubbing Shadow's ears. "And families don't abandon each other." A few people in the crowd wiped their eyes. Even hardened officers looked down, uncomfortable with the unexpected emotion rising in their throats. Just then, Blitz limped toward Shadow, nose brushing his cheek. Ranger came next, nudging him gently. Titan pressed his forehead to Shadow's shoulder, letting out a soft huff of comfort. Cole froze as he recognized what he was seeing. This wasn't just the dogs greeting each other. This was a reunion of brothers who had survived the same tragedy, the same night, the same loss. Shadow stepped forward, nuzzling Titan, then sitting beside Blitz, who rested his head on Shadow's back. Ranger curled beside them, forming a complete circle. A perfect, aching circle. Cole's breath caught. These four weren't just teammates. They were Jake's team. The realization hit the crowd like a wave as Mara spoke softly. These dogs. They were all assigned to Jake Larson, weren't they? Cole nodded. Every single one. Gasps echoed through the yard. A woman in the crowd whispered, "So they weren't just reacting to the auction. They were grieving together." Cole swallowed hard. They loved him. And when he died, they lost their world. Shadow's ears drooped at the sound of Jake's name. He pressed his muzzle into Cole's palm, whining softly. Cole knelt down, brushing his hand across Shadow's cheek. "I know, buddy. I miss him too." A tremor passed through Shadow's body, followed by a soft, choked sound, one that made the entire yard fall silent again. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was a cry. A deep, heartbroken cry that carried years of suppressed grief, confusion, and longing. Titan leaned in, nudging him gently. Blitz nudged his other side. Ranger placed a paw over Shadow's, grounding him. Cole felt tears burn his eyes, and then something unexpected happened. Shadow slowly lifted his head and nudged the chain around Cole's neck. Cole reached under his shirt and pulled out a small metal object. Jake's old K9 badge. Shadow whimpered at the sight of it, pressing his forehead to the badge as if he recognized it instantly. The crowd gasped. Cole whispered, voice trembling, "Jake gave this to me before his last shift. Told me, if anything ever happened, to wear it until I found someone worthy to give it to." Shadow stared at the badge with an intensity that made Cole's heart ache. Then Cole understood. Jake didn't want the badge passed to another officer. He wanted it given to Shadow. Cole clasped the badge gently around Shadow's collar. "There," he whispered. "It belongs to you now." Shadow closed his eyes, leaning into Cole's chest. And the entire yard watched through tears as a dog, a partner, and a family finally reunited in the only way they could. The following days were a whirlwind, a storm of headlines, investigations, and heated county meetings. What began as a quiet, hidden auction erupted into a statewide scandal the moment videos hit social media. Footage of Blitz collapsing, Shadow crying, the dogs rallying behind Cole, and internal affairs shutting the auction down spread like wildfire. The public reaction was immediate. Justice for the K9 heroes. Save the dogs. Hold the county accountable. People protested outside the sheriff's office. Rescue groups offered support. Donations poured in. News vans camped outside the courthouse. Everyone wanted one thing: to protect the dogs. But while the world watched, Cole fought behind closed doors. Inside a tense meeting room, the county board sat rigidly across long wooden tables, stacks of legal documents piled in front of them. Mara Collins stood beside Cole, her expression sharp and unwavering. A board member cleared his throat. "Officer Bennett, you have requested full custody of all retired K-9 units involved in the investigation. That is highly irregular." Cole leaned forward. "What's irregular is pushing them into forced retirement just to replace them with newer dogs." Mara placed evidence folders on the table. "Internal Affairs has verified misconduct, falsified reports, and serious violations of animal welfare statutes." Another board member frowned. "Even so, transferring all dogs to a single individual—" "They're not property," Cole interrupted, voice firm. "They're living officers who served this county with loyalty. They deserve to live together, safely." The board exchanged tense glances. Mara folded her arms. Given the emotional trauma these dogs suffered, separating them now would cause irreversible harm. Cole nodded. "They're a bonded unit. They survived tragedy together. They grieved together. They trust each other, and they trust me." Silence settled over the room. Then the chairwoman leaned back with a weary sigh. "Officer Bennett, can you support them? Financially? Medically? Long-term?" Cole didn't hesitate. "Yes, I've already secured partnerships with K-9 rehabilitation centers, trainers, and veterinarians. I'll take full responsibility." More whispers, more hesitation. Finally, the chairwoman spoke again. "Very well." The room stilled. "In recognition of their service and in light of the county's misconduct, the board hereby grants full custody of the retired K-9 units to Officer Cole Bennett." Cole felt the breath leave his body. "But," she added, "we will require routine welfare checks." "That's fine," Cole said, voice steady despite the emotion swelling in his chest. "I welcome them." Mara smiled slightly. "It's settled then." Across the hall, cameras flashed as reporters raced to capture the news. Protesters cheered. Officers who secretly supported Cole shook his hand. But the real moment, the one that mattered, was waiting outside. Cole stepped into the sunlight, and the dogs, resting under a shaded area, sprang to their feet. Titan barked joyfully. Blitz limped over, leaning into Cole. Ranger wagged his tail. Shadow pressed his muzzle into Cole's palm. "They're yours now," Mara said quietly beside him. Cole shook his head, tears forming. "No," he whispered. "I'm theirs." The dogs surrounded him, forming that familiar protective circle. For the first time since Jake's death, they weren't just surviving. They had a future. Together. A month later, the rundown auction yard felt like a distant nightmare. The sun now rose over a different place, Cole's countryside property on the outskirts of town. What had once been an old, empty ranch had transformed into a sanctuary filled with new life, new hope, and new beginnings. The morning, light washed over wide-open fields, sturdy wooden training platforms, shaded rest stations, and a newly built K-9 rehabilitation barn. Everything was designed for one purpose: to give the retired police dogs the life they deserved. Cole stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching as the dogs sprinted through the field. Titan raced ahead, ears flapping proudly. Ranger trotted beside him, nose to the ground, mastering a new scent game. Blitz, though still recovering, moved with newfound strength, his limp barely noticeable. But Shadow stayed close. He pressed against Cole's leg, tail swaying gently as they watched the others play. There was no fear in his eyes now, only trust, calmness, and something Cole hadn't seen in a long time. Joy. "You can go play, buddy," Cole said, patting his head. Shadow barked once, nuzzled Cole's hand, then finally sprinted into the field to join his brothers. The sight brought a smile to Cole's face so genuine it shook the last piece of grief from his chest. The dogs were healing, and so was he. Inside the barn, volunteers from local shelters gathered with enrichment toys, food supplies, and medical equipment donated after the story spread online. A veterinarian visited twice a week to monitor the dog's progress. Trainers offered free sessions. Children from nearby schools wrote letters to the K9 heroes, thanking them for their service. The community had rallied behind them. Cole walked toward the training area where Mara Collins stood waiting with a clipboard. She watched the dogs with softened eyes. "They look happy." "They are," Cole said, "for the first time in a long time." Mara flipped the clipboard shut. Internal Affairs concluded the investigation. The county board members who signed the fraudulent retirements, they're being prosecuted. Cole nodded. "Good. The dogs deserve justice, too." "They got it," Mara said quietly. "Because of you." Cole shook his head. "Not because of me, because they never gave up. They kept fighting, even when they couldn't speak." Mara smiled. "Well, you listened. That matters." A sharp bark echoed across the field. Shadow had stopped running and now stared at Cole, tail wagging excitedly. Cole laughed and jogged toward the dogs. Shadow pounced playfully as Cole reached him, and soon Titan, Ranger, and Blitz joined, forming a lively circle around him. Their joyful barks filled the air like a celebration. As Cole knelt down, surrounded by fur, warmth, and wagging tails, he whispered, "Jake, I kept my promise." A gentle breeze swept across the field, rustling the grass and carrying the sounds of laughter, barking, and new hope. Here, on this land, their land, the dogs weren't discarded heroes or forgotten soldiers. They were family, safe, loved, home, and this time, no one would ever take that away from them. This story reminds us that loyalty isn't taught, it's lived. These retired K9s gave everything they had to protect their communities, yet were nearly forgotten when their service was done. True heroes don't always wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four paws, asking for nothing but kindness in return. Officer Cole showed that one person's courage can expose injustice, rewrite broken systems, and save lives that others overlook. Let this be a lesson for all of us. Stand up for those who cannot speak, honor those who sacrifice, and never underestimate the power of compassion. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales. And before you leave, tell us in the comments. What did this story teach you today? Your voice matters, and your support helps us keep these meaningful stories alive.